Hello, guys. Welcome to our podcast. This is going to be our experience in the Chinese American Museum. My name is Oscar Garibay,
My name is Russell Owens.
and we will be discussing several questions about what our experience was like at the Chinese American Museum. So, we decided to structure this podcast in a way that we can both express our thoughts on the topics. So, Dave will ask a couple questions, and I will also ask a couple questions, but we will both give our responses to all the questions. So, starting with the first question, Dave, what were your initial impressions of the museum and the area?
My initial impression of the museum was that it was clean and fundamentally sound for educational reasons. The area outside the museum had a celebration of indigenous people dancing. There was no police allowed in the area for neighborhood reasons. This set the tone for what I was about to endure inside of the museum. Inside the museum had an Andy Warhol effect along the artwork. The artwork popped out towards the participant. Also, the floor shined, it was so clean.
So, I thought the area around the museum was very busy. There was a lot of traffic, there was also a lot of people visiting the museum. I think this has to do with the fact that it was a Saturday morning and maybe just people had more time to visit the museum. Also, in my opinion, walking into the museum, everything seemed very organized and pleasant. It was very surprising for me to see how easy the context of all the material in the museum was easy to comprehend.
Oscar, can you explain the context of the museum?
So, its context is that it is a museum that's located in downtown Los Angeles as part of El Pueblo de Los Angeles Historic Monument, and it was dedicated to the history and experience of Chinese Americans in the state of California. The first such museum in Southern California, actually, and it presents exhibits of fine art by Chinese American artists, as well as historical exhibits.
The context of the museum was fascinating. It is placed in Los Angeles, off of Los Angeles Street. It took me 45 minutes to drive there, and it was well worth the wait. The area is clean and even had adjacent dancing and costume event going on next door. The biggest context clue in Asian pop culture is that Chinatown has moved to a different part of Los Angeles. It set the tone for the museum.
What do you think was the purpose of the museum, or what sort of message or idea is it trying to communicate?
The message at the museum was clear of what the Chinese men had to endure in order to become free citizens, as well as bring the females along the way later on the historical context of immigration or the Asian diaspora.
What do you think was the purpose of the museum, or what sort of message or idea is it trying to communicate?
The message at the museum was clear of what the Chinese men had to endure in order to become free citizens, as well as bring the females along the way later on the historical context of immigration or the Asian diaspora.
I believe the purpose of the museum is to communicate the history of Chinese immigration to the United States from China and how it influenced the U.S. American history.
How do you think the museum communicates its message, and what does it do to make sure its message is clear?
So, aside from the language being relatively easy to understand, I felt that the museum used a lot of imagery and visuals to communicate its message effectively through emotions that were reflected through the pictures of the museum.
The visuals and pictures on the wall created a sense of urgency and a feeling of rapport towards the members of China, who needed to free themselves of oppression from their mainland and become free citizens in America. Despite the fact that they were denied for years, Congress passed a law about the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 only to suppress the Asian culture.
So, how do you think this relates to our course material covered in class?
Yes, the museum had a plethora of information as to why it relates to Asian pop culture. Similarly to how we have studied colonization and unjust circumstance in foreign countries, the Chinese American Museum focuses on the immigration pattern to America. Immigration and colonization are still hot topics in today's 21st century world. The museum relates to Asian popular culture and globalization because issues of sovereignty, civil rights, and location are brought forth to a variety of people. Thanks to the Board of Trustees and the original founder, Philip Guerrero, people here in America can understand the background and perseverance of the Chinese American. Although it was more of a masculine study at the museum, gender roles are still relevant in China and across the continent of Asia.
So I believe that the culture of Asia is constructed by the collective and diverse customs and traditions of things like art, music, literature, lifestyle, philosophy, and even religion that have been practiced and maintained by numerous ethnic groups of the continent of Asia. And I believe that the Chinese are very important and they contribute a lot to the overall culture of Asia. Alrighty, and for these next set of questions, for the most part, they will be leaning more towards the side of the production of popular culture.
From Production of Popular Culture, question number 4. How does the titled poster, Starting a Community, from the Chinese American Museum reflect norms and stereotypes about gender?
I felt that this informational poster found in the museum really demonstrates how men were really the foundation of Chinese immigration to the United States. It was mostly men who came to China to work in mining gold, building railroads, farming, and even became entrepreneurs and starting their own businesses.
The gender norm noted in the Chinese American Museum reflected that men could work while women had to stay at home. This created a nationalist impact in America and China. In America, Chinese men were allowed to work as indentured servants for the railroads. Back home, the women had to wait until they were notified from the men to come to America when they were allowed.
How do you think the Chinese Exclusion Act affected women?
The Chinese Exclusion Act directly affected women because they could not work in the United States and they could not live in the United States either. It was 30 years of sitting and waiting until the San Francisco fires eliminated a lot of paperwork. That allows Chinese women to immigrate through California in 1919.
Overall, I believe this created a shortage of Chinese women in the United States. It was very sad to learn that Chinese men could not bring their wives to the United States because the cost of supporting them was too high. And also, the Chinese men could not bring their wives over because the cost of bringing them to the United States was also very high. Lastly, there was many tough legal and administrative barriers put on Chinese immigrants by the United States government.
How does the representation of gender change over time? Since the Chinese Exclusion Act was over at 1919 when a young boy crossed into California to meet his father at Angel Island, a lot of Chinese immigrants were able to find sanctuary in California. As a Western impact, they followed suit of a young boy who wanted to meet his father. Even then, they are still leaving female representation out of the equation of the Asian diaspora. It implies that only a male could immigrate here. Chinese women would eventually be allowed to move to the United States of America, since a lot of lawmakers did not want Chinese men to marry American women.
Alrighty, and for these next set of questions, for the most part, they will be relying or leaning more towards the side of the consumption of popular culture. How do you think people of different genders interpret popular culture?
There is a varying opinion of what to include on gender in Asian popular culture. The best way is to be inclusive and that all genders are treated equally. According to the Chinese American Museum, the most represented gender was Chinese men. Based on the information, it did come off as a traditional museum, in comparison to an organic or modernized museum for a variety of genders. One way of knowledge would be to include women in the museum's analysis more often. This diversity could benefit the dynamic of popular culture in China.
I really feel that the interpretation of popular culture does not change through different genders. I feel that it is generally recognized by all members of society as a set of practices, beliefs, and objects that are dominant in society at a given point in time.
How does gender affect the way people access popular culture?
One way I can think of that gender can possibly affect the assessment of popular culture is, for example, women, they can sometimes subconsciously still feel that they have the responsibility to take care of the home and the children, while the men work outside of the home. And the same for men, where sometimes they can have the subconscious feeling that they have the responsibility to leave home and work while the female stays behind to watch the home and children.
One crucial lesson that I've learned about gender is it is not just male or female. Yes, I think the inclusion of women will make a difference, even though there are over 20 different genders according to our lecture. We still need all of these genders to freely and equally access popular culture. According to the museum, the men will have the utmost access to what is popular in Asia, despite some of the drawbacks in the Asian economy or marketplace. For example, the layoffs in the Asian economy have depleted so many people. It seems that the men can use a boost from an entirely different source of financial gratitude from a variety of other genders.
How has the consumption of popular culture changed over time based on gender roles?
Popular culture has changed over time because women are more freely allowed to work in a particular market. According to our lectures and television shows, we have seen Asian women be held in high regard in the workplace. Even according to the museum, the Chinese gained their independence and are eventually allowed to become citizens during the civil rights era. They officially were a part of a revolution for free and equal citizens of America. Their roles are ever changing within the economic virtue of the job market because there are even more genders in need.
Well, this just about wraps up our podcast. I hope you had a good time listening to our discussion, and thank you so much for listening.